I'm shocked at how often I go out, and I'm a blind guy who wears sunglasses 24/7. I either have a seeing eye dog with me or a cane. And I am shocked at how many people don't realize I'm blind. And I'm pretty convinced it's because they just can't imagine that I could be. Like the idea that there'd be a blind person sitting at the bar next to him or behind him in line at the store is like so far outside their experience, despite all the clues I'm trying to give them. They're like trying to figure out what's going on. It's like, what is this?
Sam Atwood, welcome to the See-Through podcast.
Hey, thanks, Lance. I'm really excited to be here.
Did I see some red wine there?
Yes, that is exactly what's happening here. A little libation.
I love it, man.
A little Pinot Noir for.
You got the lamp on. You're sitting there. You got the sweater.
Got my comfy. Yeah, I mean, Grampy Sam. That's kind of my Grampy core is kind of my aesthetic.
I love it, man. I'm super excited to talk to you because we've been talking before this official talk, and we've been talking about your life and your journey with blindness, and there's so much to cover. And I kind of want to start at where you are at now. And I'm going to preface this a little bit just so the listeners can kind of get caught up and up to speed. I want this theme of this episode to be about your vision loss journey because you were born legally blind.
Correct.
And, you have like a 47-year vision loss journey going on. That's pretty epic. And you've experienced different phases of being legally blind. Mm-hmm. And you grew up legally blind and you've aged into it, and you've worked a bunch of different jobs. You've done a lot of interesting things. Like you climbed Mount Kilimanjaro?
Yep. Well, actually, I climbed half of it. The team I went with climbed, much of the team climbed all of it. I climbed half of it.
Yeah.
Got pretty sick, but.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into that.
Yeah, for sure.
And, you've had guide dogs, you've been a cane user, and you're now a stand-up comedian.
It's true.
You also have worked tons of jobs, and you are currently employed and working now.
Yeah.
And what I find fascinating is that you were born legally blind, and now you're kind of getting to a phase where you're almost reaching total blindness, right?
Yeah, functionally, I'm really, really close.
Yeah.
And the little bits and hints of useful vision that I have are so unreliable that it's functionally I'm pretty close to that.
What I find interesting about that is, you're born legally blind and now you're progressing into that. And one of the big reasons that, we're having this episode is because you reached out to me and you mentioned how surprised you were at how difficult it was even transitioning from the phase of legal blindness you were at into the phase you're currently living with, and how your brain's kind of having a hard time wrapping its mind around what's going on. And I'm just kind of setting the mood here, setting the scene, because I want everyone to kind of know what we're going to dive into. But yeah, we're going to start from when you grew up, and we're going to head into where you are now. But I thought this would be a cool moment to kind of play a stand-up clip of yours so people can kind of get a little flavor of what you're up to there.
That sounds good. That sounds great.
All right.
Here's a privilege I have. I am super comfortable with daylight savings time. I think it's fair to say that I've been a daylight conservationist all my life. Not just half the year either. 365, 24/7 since 1976. As I've transitioned from legal blindness to felony blindness, my daylight footprint has gotten smaller and smaller. I have almost reached total daylight independence. Another privilege I don't have, being able to see photos on online dating sites. And let me tell you, the descriptive text options, vague. For example, the term curvy covers covers a lot of ground. Because there's stacked curvy, there's Rubenesque curvy, and there is no room for Jesus curvy. And while I may not care a whole lot about what you look like, I am very interested in what you may potentially feel like. I have the privilege of never being asked to be designated driver. I do not, nor ever will, have the privilege of knowing where over there is. I also don't have the privilege of enjoying fondue.
But yeah, that's a nice stand-up bit. I go to a lot of comedy shows, so whenever I saw this, it kind of pumped me up because I don't see a lot of like comedic material about blindness and vision loss.
Yeah.
And I thought you covered it in a very clever way. I really enjoyed that, and I think you're good.
Well, I appreciate that. Particularly from someone who actually likes stand-up and watches stand-up. You know, I think that I know, particularly before I got into stand-up, but sort of, you know, even still, like someone, you know, a friend or a friend of a friend would be like, "Oh yeah, I'm an amateur comedian. Let me play my stuff for you." And you had this like feeling in your stomach where it's like, ooh, like, I hope it's funny. Like, you know, how much do I like this person? How honest do they want me to be? So no, I appreciate that. I'm glad you like it. Yeah, I spent a lot of time doing different kinds of performance of theater and improv and Shakespeare. And then I got busy. I moved and I got busy with some other stuff, and I was in a different town, and I didn't do anything for like 7 years. And then I got really excited. I moved to Portland, Maine to take a job, and there was a scene, there was stuff going on. And I started working on a set to go to an open mic. So it'll be 2 years. It's actually probably 2 years this week that I did my first open mic, when I come to think about it. Maybe it was 2 years last week, but still going after it. I love it. Getting back into performance and, you know, having people laugh at me in a way that I want, you know?
Yeah.
You know, making them laugh at me instead of just causing them to laugh at me.
Yeah. I feel you on that. Yeah. It's something that I've honestly toyed with, because I go to a lot of stand-up shows. I live in New York City, and I'll go to like,
is that a New York
Comedy Cellar?
Is that a New York accent, Lance?
No, it's not.
Okay. I didn't think so.
Yeah.
I was pretty sure you're not a native New Yorker.
No, I'm a classic, you know, New York transplant, like most people are. But yeah, I'm from North Carolina.
Okay. Cool.
And I grew up there. I lived there for 27 years, and I moved here.
Right on.
But yeah, so I go to like the Comedy Cellar and like the Stand, and I see, you know, I've seen tons of people, and I really enjoy it, but it kind of makes me feel like, could I do it? You know, but it's so scary to even imagine trying it. Yeah. So yeah, I want to get your insight on that. Like how, like for anyone who's maybe tempted, maybe if it's not stand-up comedy, but trying something that they're a little scared to do, would you just recommend doing it, or what's your idea on that?
Always. Yeah. I mean, within reason, like,
yeah.
But, I mean, I think that being afraid is good, is important. We have fear for a reason, and I think that, you know, we can have fear and then go do a thing. I mean, I get nervous every time I go up on stage. But you do it, and like having those nerves, having that, you know, being afraid, like if you stop feeling that fear, stop feeling those nerves, then do you really give a shit? Like,
true.
Do you care anymore? A friend who's a musician who has pretty serious nerves said that to me. Is like, you know, if you have nerves, it shows you still care about what you're doing. And, from the fear perspective, really, it's the hardest time. The first time is the hardest time. Like
Yeah.
we fear the unknown, right? So,
Yeah.
particularly as a blind guy, I fear the unknown, which is getting to be more and more in some ways. Generally, there's really not that much to be afraid of. Like,
Yeah.
worst case scenario, you go do an open mic somewhere in New York, you don't have a good time and you're not funny and you never do it again and nobody ever remembers.
True.
That's the worst case scenario.
Yeah. Worst case scenario is something I like to think of when I'm stressed or my friend's stressed or my wife is stressed. It's like, all right, well, what's the worst case scenario? And then you can kind of plan backwards from that.
Yeah. How bad can this be? And I mean, there are situations where, sure, it can be really bad. But I think a lot of times when it's people who want to go and sometimes when you're blind, it's just going someplace for the first time. Like,
yeah,
I've never, I want to go to this store. I want to go to this restaurant. I want to go get a coffee in this new place. And like, I'm afraid because I don't know the layout. And I don't know how they'll treat me. And I don't know, if they'll help me if I need it. I mean, little tiny things like that can be scary. But usually you go and, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And you do it and then you got a new place and a new experience and maybe you like it, maybe you don't like it, maybe it becomes your regular and maybe you never go back. But, I think that way too many people let fear keep them from having experiences that they want to have, and particularly people with disabilities, because not only is the world not built, to accommodate most of our disabilities, but we don't always have a ton of support from people in our lives saying, yeah, go do that thing, go try that thing. People without disabilities are, not always the biggest proponents of get out there and try it and that's wrapped up in their own issues. So,
oh yeah, I experienced that a lot where I feel like people want me to play it safer than I want to.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always kind of been like a dreamer, like a kind of a daydreamer, always planning my next creative project, always kind of have something going on, cooking up something.
Right.
And I like to I call it calculated risk, and so far they've all worked out for me.
Yeah.
So hopefully, nice. I'll keep the momentum going. But I think when you talk about career and kind of living and trying to thrive in a world that's not built for people with disabilities, I think you have a lot of experience. That life experience has probably given you, one, a lot of comedic material, but two, got you to a place where you kind of know and kind of understand, all right, well, I have to kind of step outside my comfort zone.
Yeah.
In order for things to happen. And, you've worked a lot of different careers, and that's something that's rare with people, with your level of vision. I think there's like a statistic. What is it? Like the last I've looked, it was like around 78% of the blind community is unemployed.
Yeah. Unemployed or underemployed.
Yeah.
because I mean, honestly, like, if you're rolling silverware and you love it, then, more power to you. But if you're rolling silverware because you don't think or somebody else doesn't think you can do anything else, then, that's a problem. Like,
yeah,
you need better people in your life. You need somebody who's encouraging you to do more. And I've had those people in my life on both sides. Like, I mean, I remember going through, when I was 18 or 19, I was on the West Coast and I was in a residential program learning blind skills with the idea that in preparation for, significant vision loss. Just to give some context, up until 18, I was high partial. So I was like 2,200, I've been legally blind my entire life. But I was high partial. I was pretty much faking it. Like, I was living like a sighted person, in the sense of I wasn't using a cane. You know, I really wanted to pretend I wasn't blind. I was open about being blind if somebody asked me, but when I was walking around, you know, I didn't want people looking at me being like, oh, he's blind. You know, I didn't want to carry a cane. And, you know, I got a lot of bruises. But I recognized that I was going to lose vision. My prognosis, so I have a condition called Peters anomaly. And as you can probably tell from the name, it's rare.
Yeah, I've never heard of it actually.
But basically, in many, many cases, what it means is you develop glaucoma at birth. And glaucoma is treatable but not curable. And
glaucoma is with like that pressure in your eye.
Exactly. The pressure in your eye isn't regulated, and effectively what it does is it squeezes off blood supply to the optic nerve.
Okay.
So to cure glaucoma, you have to be able to work literally with the optic nerve, and we aren't there yet. But so my prognosis from that, you know, from day one was you're going to be totally blind at some point, and nobody could tell me when, nobody could give me a timeline. You know, it was just sometime you're going to be totally blind. So 19, I was living in Seattle. I was going to a residential program to learn skills to prepare for more significant vision loss. And one of the people in that program, one of the instructors in that program was like, you know, really talking to me about going into a sheltered workshop. Like that was I don't even know if people are familiar with that anymore, but I mean, basically, you know, a staffed workshop where people, you know, blind people, deaf blind people were doing like really specific tasks, making pens, you know, putting ink sticks in pens and screwing them together, or, you know, pushing one button on a sewing machine every, you know, 30 seconds. And, you know, and you didn't even make minimum wage. It was like piecemeal work. And I was just like, wow, like this is a blind person telling me that I should be going, you know, looking at a sheltered workshop to work. And that, you know, that stuck with me. It's like, wow, we're not even encouraging each other to get after it, you know, to try new things and do new things. What's funny is after that program, but through the Division of Blind Services in Washington State, I can't remember what the specific name of the agency is. I went from that into a work experience program that they set up to try and help blind folks get work experience in career fields that interested them. So instead of going into a sheltered workshop, they helped me land a job at a gun shop.
Oh.
And so they ended up, I ended up working at a gun shop for 3 months before I started college for the second or third time at that point. But so yeah, it was just kind of funny, like from one extreme to the other, like, oh, you're going to work in a sheltered workshop, or, oh, nope, you're selling firearms to Microsoft employees. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot there, like, in terms of like the shelter workshop. I know blind people probably don't mind it, you know, but a lot of people, it's not for them. Like I would absolutely hate that, to be honest with you. And it would, like, monotonous task is not for me, you know? So yeah, it's like knowing your personality, knowing your worth, knowing your skill set, you know, your gut feeling. If someone told me that, my gut feeling would be like, that's not for me.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it sounds like you have felt that way.
Oh yeah. I mean, I was, almost offended by even the,
Yeah.
even the suggestion.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, and it coming from, a blind person and, in their mind and based on their position, a relatively successful blind person
Mm.
who, came away from interacting with me thinking that like that was my place in life.
I think that's a perfect example of like people who don't know you and then they're trying to make assumptions and decisions for you. You got to make your own decisions. You can't let somebody you just met make these kind of big calls for you based off of an assumption or basically selling you short.
Yeah.
I always want to preach that, do what you want to do. Don't let other people tell you what you can and can't do.
Well, right. And I mean,
Definitely.
even not knowing somebody, but like people's assumptions around blindness and what that means. And people are
Yeah, like that's
making
all we're good
these,
for,
right, right. Like, oh, well, you're blind. So, you're fragile and you're sensitive and you're never going to be able to, compete at, with other people, with, quote unquote,
Yeah.
normal people, able bodied people, fully
Yeah.
sight, pick your phrase. So yeah, and I think that you said people in sheltered workshops who may be fine with it, and I'm sure that's true. And as I said, I would never, if somebody loves rolling silverware or somebody loves putting pens together, I would never talk down to them about that because that's their thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
My fear is there are a lot of people, and hopefully fewer and fewer as we see the landscape change some, who
Fell for it.
and they don't know the alternative. Nobody
Yeah.
ever showed them or told them or encouraged them to try something else.
Yeah.
So, that's where, if I was, a little bit less of a, cocky bastard, and had been convinced like to go work in that sheltered workshop and live in low income housing and like, what would that look like now? Like, holy shit, that would be, and I mean, I can't imagine it, but, I think that, I think there are people who find themselves in that situation and they don't know that there's more out there because nobody ever helped them explore when they could or when they needed to.
Do you think that's like a generational thing in terms of you mentioned like the landscape changing. Do you see like a difference in, let's say the 80s versus now or the 90s or like in terms of how people are
100.
blind people are addressed or what the expectations are or has society's expectations stayed the same but the blind community's expectations of themselves improved?
I think so.
Which one is it?
I think so. And I think, you're a perfect example of what has happened. And it's a thing that's happened across the board. Our ability to communicate with each other easily. Our ability, I mean, going back to what the late 90s and very early 2000s, where suddenly it's like, oh, they're online forums and they're specific and like you can talk to other blind people. I mean, I grew up in rural Maine. There was another blind kid in my school, but he was a few years younger than and I went to public school. He was a few years younger than I was, and he had some pretty significant developmental disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So like, we weren't like hanging out, shooting the shit about blindness. Like we had less in common than I had with a lot of people, who weren't blind. But like, so now, a program like yours where I can go on YouTube and look for, or my podcast app, whatever, and look for stuff about vision loss, look for stuff about blindness, look for, what is it? No Barriers that Eric Weinmeier and, folks do. And, we hear what other people are doing. I don't know that society, I don't know that the general population is really, I don't know that their minds have changed significantly. I really think that this is a thing where the disability community, and I mean that as a whole,
Yeah.
has forced a level of awareness that wasn't there. And said, you know what, we're not actually going to work in sheltered workshops for less than minimum wage. And we have the right to go to the same schools and get the same education that everybody else does. And we need to figure out a way to make that happen. And, I know probably the biggest advantage I've had in my life was parents that wanted to learn something about, they didn't believe that blindness was like the end of my world. They had a blind kid and it behooved them to find out what I needed to be successful and what success could look like. And they did that, and they encouraged me, and they, it was a little bit easier for them because I was only legally blind. I could, I didn't need, particularly as a kid, a ton of adaptation to do some things, but they also knew I was going to be totally blind, and they, encouraged me with that. Like, look, this is a thing you have now, but it isn't going to be forever. And I think, out of all the blind people I've met and I've talked to, and it's been a lot, the people who had parents or family members, whatever their situation was growing up, who encouraged them and who said to them, like, no, be a lawyer, be a, whatever you want to be, are the people who have been most successful. And there are a lot of blind folks and a lot of folks with disabilities who didn't have that. Their parents were terrified. They didn't know any better. They didn't know what to do. They went to, maybe they went to the state agency for the blind, and God help them if they got some blind person who said, oh, well, sheltered workshop, because they're the expert. The parents are going to listen. And, very, very few people have any experience with blind people, and people are terrified of being blind. There was an interesting study done a while ago where it listed 10 really horrible things, or what, were perceived as really horrible things. And it asked people to rank them in what scared them most. And blindness was number one. Blindness scared people more than cancer. And that's wild to me.
Especially since cancer can kill you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it was just, it was an incredible study, and I wish I could remember it off the top of my head where it came from. I think
I've seen that study
American
as well.
Foundation for the Blind, I want to say, but it was, maybe it was even almost a decade ago now. But
and I think it was either the New York Times that did an article about it too, about how it was the most feared thing, blindness.
And so when everybody's walking around terrified of just how you live your life, it's hard for them to support you, because most people can't fathom being blind and living a normal life. And there's that word normal again, but I have to cook and pay bills and go to work and, pick up my dog's poop and, do all the things that everybody else is doing. So, it just, I think we've made a lot of progress. I think there's a lot of progress to be made, particularly around visibility and, helping people who aren't blind to understand our capacities, and then understand like how much more capable blind people could be with a little bit of consideration to how the world is developed. So there's still a long way to go, but I think it's definitely better than it was. And I think that, like I said, shows like yours, the communication we have now, the internet, all this stuff, really helps us be in contact and learn from each other and reach these, broader audiences and, really specific audiences.
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's something when I started this podcast was part of the reason for it, because growing up, I only knew my mom, as someone living who was legally blind. Mm-hmm. And I had realized I had never really communicated with other, people in the blindness community. And there was so much I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I kind of had this theory that my fear of losing my vision had a lot to do with just my ignorance on the topic of it, basically. Mm-hmm. So talking to people was almost in a way like me facing that fear. And it's been unreal, the amount of like mental shift my mind has had from having all these discussions. It really does help, the exposure therapy kind of aspect of it. And also too, it's like this era, like having a podcast, like even when I was in high school, their podcast didn't exist. Mm-hmm. So it makes you feel more isolated. Like you mentioned, you grew up in like a rural part of Maine. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a small town in North Carolina.
Yeah.
And it's like same kind of thing where you don't really see any other blind people around. And then when you're told, I'll speak for myself, when I was told I had this eye condition that is going to lead to legal blindness and sometimes complete blindness, it made me feel terrified and it made me feel isolated because I felt like no one else was experiencing it. Mm-hmm. And then here comes podcasts, here comes social media.
Right.
And now there's like this kind of like, big gathering of people who are being kind of proud and kind of talking in a positive way about their disability, which is still something, like you said, the blind and disabled community's perspective has become more positive, more let's go, let's try different things. We're more than what society thinks of us.
Yep.
But like you said, society's still kind of stuck, and like you said, they're still afraid.
Right. And I mean, the reality is, like you said, like there's 75 some odd % unemployment, right? Like there are still way too many blind people who don't leave their house very often, who aren't out there engaging. And I don't, and I say that because I think it's too bad for them. It's like their lives could be, but like, I'm shocked at how often I go out, and I'm a blind guy who wears sunglasses 24/7. And I either have a seeing eye dog with me or a cane. And I am shocked at how many people don't realize I'm blind. And I'm pretty convinced it's because they just can't imagine that I could be. Like the idea that there'd be a blind person sitting at the bar next to him or behind him in line at the store is like so far outside their experience. Despite all the clues I'm trying to give them, they're like trying to figure out what's going on. It's like, what is this? And it's like, and that's
a good point. Yeah, they can't even fathom it.
Yeah.
And it makes them uncomfortable. So maybe like a way to kind of protect themselves is to just kind of play pretend as if you're not there, or to not engage with you at all. And then there's also this fear, I feel like, especially these days, where with all these sensitivities and to topics that maybe they're afraid that even talking to you about it, they might offend you. So they just just say, all right, better safe than sorry, and just don't engage her. But it's like, it's all about the intent and how you approach someone, So if you're curious about something, or, and you approach someone in a very respectful way, I mean, every now and then you might run into someone who's like, get the hell out of here. But it's like,
I mean, I would much rather somebody ask me a question and give me the opportunity to answer it than have them not ask me that question and just they like make up their own answer, or they go on Google. I mean, not that most people care enough to do this, but like go on Google and ask a question about blindness. Like, but it's, it is hard. I mean, we talk about it with other things, like it's also not my job to educate anyone who wants to be educated whenever they want to be educated. Like I am a full-time pedestrian, and nothing pisses me off more than somebody like literally getting in my way on the street to stop to tell me, one, they ask me about my dog, and two, they tell me about their blind uncle. And it's like, dude, I'm going somewhere. Like, I don't know you. You don't know me. It's like, it's like if you were parked at a crosswalk and somebody walked up to your window and like knocked on your window and be like, ooh, what year's your car? She's a beauty. Well, my uncle had a Ford Fusion back. Like, that's how it feels. And it's just like, and I try not to be rude to people, but, and usually I'm not, but I have gotten very good at like clearly not engaging and moving on. Because sometimes it's just, I mean, I have, people come up to me when I'm having dinner with my partner. And like, we're at a table for two, there's a candle, like, and they come up and they want to talk to my dog, and my dog's under the table. It's like, no, like, what are you doing? Like, this is not, you're not invited. So there is stuff like that where I feel like, I want people to engage. I want people to be curious, but I also want people to be conscious of like, I'm going about my life the same way that you're going about yours. And like, it's not my job to just stop and, answer your questions wherever and whenever we happen to be.
And it's not your whole identity. I think, it's like you have a whole entire personality and interests and hobbies that exist completely outside of, your vision. Yet I'm sure that must be frustrating for you. That's probably what people want to talk to you about the most.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, it's the dog. It's the dog. And a lot of times people don't even recognize it as a seeing eye dog. They like recognize it as a service dog, but they want to talk about the dog. And it's like, no, we're both working here. And we're just going to keep on working because. So, I mean, and I love, I say all that, and I'll go on to say, I love to talk about blindness. I love to share my experience with people who want to understand, who approach this with the desire to know. I can talk for a long time about this, as you and I will find out. But
well, good thing we're having a podcast.
Yeah, I know, right? If this was a TikTok video, it would never fly. I want people to be educated, and I want to help people understand, and there's a time and a place and a way for people to go about it. And I'm sure you're not at this point yet, but one of the things as a person with a disability you find is people will start a conversation with, I don't want to offend you.
Yeah.
But are you blind? And it's like, like, why would you offend me? Like, it's like, you're not telling me anything I don't know. So I don't know. It's hard. It's like on one hand, you want people to understand, you want to share information with people, you want people to feel more comfortable. And on the other hand, a lot of the time you just want to live your life and get your errands done and, get to work on
Yeah.
time. And
Yeah, 1,000%. It's like sometimes you're in the mood, sometimes you're not.
yeah, yeah,
I have bad days. I mean, I'm not at the point where people are asking me that because,
they're not identifying you as a blind person at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
That probably ties into your comedy, because you have all these types of scenarios you find yourself in, and then you're talking to a sighted audience, most likely, right?
Oh yeah.
So you're kind of what they're interested in hearing about, and therefore you tailor your jokes, and not all your jokes are vision loss related. I know that, but
Correct. Yeah.
the ones you do make about your vision loss, it's kind of like you have this like inside information, and you kind of use it to your advantage to kind of string them along and help like your punchlines hit a little harder.
Well, and I think about what they're interested in, but the other thing I have is I get to create jokes that are about what I'm interested in them knowing.
Oh, yeah. You're in control.
I can lead a conversation about blindness, and I'm the only one who's talking, but they're participating because the only way, because I'm hearing them respond, I'm hearing them gasp, or I'm hearing them laugh, or I'm hearing them groan. And so, comedy is a great, great way. And you know this because you watch a lot of it, to take a hard, uncomfortable subject and make it just comfortable enough that people can kind of listen to it and think about it and, laugh at it. And it's why, and it works really well for, talking about disability, I feel like, and nobody's ever heard my jokes. Like there are some blind comedians out there. There are a handful. But in general, most, it's like, you're not hearing the same stuff. Like nobody's heard my material before. And I did a class last year, after I'd been doing open mics for about a year, and the set that came out of that class, it's about 8 minutes, and I think it's the one I sent you. So that whole set had a lot to do with blindness. And I talked, I kind of open it with talking about, on one hand, the privilege of being a, white, straight, upper middle-aged male, and then contrasting that with, being a person with a disability. And then there's this weird, like, woke culture privileges for having a disability. Anyway, it's all about blindness. And when I finished that, I liked it. I was really happy with the set. I was really happy with the performance. I got a lot of good feedback. But I got caught up in this like fear of being pigeonholed as a blind comic. Like, I was going to be the blind comedian. And I stressed about that. And I really started to like work on material that was different than that and that stayed away from that. And I was really trying to avoid blindness altogether. And what I ended up coming around to is I am always going to be a blind comedian. Like, it's just the reality. Like, blindness affects my life pretty much, full time. In fact, full time. So, I talk about lots of things that aren't, blindness specific, but they are always from my perspective as a blind person. And I just kind of was like, okay, like I am going to do all kinds of different material, and some of it's going to be really specifically about disability and blindness, and really, have that push to not only make people laugh, but inform people. but there's all this other material I do, but it's going to be affected when when I do jokes about electric cars and driverless cars, like they can't help but be informed. My opinions, my thoughts can't help but be informed by the fact that I'm a blind person.
Yeah.
Even if the bit isn't about me being a blind person, the bit is about something totally different. And it just was like, okay, like this is what I'm going to do. And there are parts of my sets now that it wouldn't matter whether I was a blind person standing up telling them or not. And then there are other parts where it's like, this isn't about blindness, but it's a blind person talking to you about it. So I'm going to throw in, this little bit of information or this little piece of how it affects me directly, that maybe you've never thought of.
Yeah.
And so it's, but it took some thinking about, and like, can I, how do I do this? How do I embrace this and not have it become like a one-trick pony? Like, oh, it's Sam and he's talking about walking with a cane again, or he's talking about wearing an orange hat again, or, whatever. But, just that breadth of experience. And it's like, I think it's anybody from certainly a minority or a disenfranchised community, like, population, like those experiences affect your life. So, and I mean, for all of us, right? Our life experiences, creates our lens. So it's just my lens happens to be very, very specific and very, very different than most people's.
Yeah, that's a super interesting thought to have, where I always like to think about bridging the gap between, you talk about how society's opinion of the disability community hasn't really changed that much, but the disabilities community opinion about itself has changed a lot and progressed for the better.
Yeah.
And I always find it a struggle, or at least I feel like it's a struggle, like for me to have like this podcast, it's very niche, right? Mm-hmm. And I want to have as big of an audience as possible, in the same way you probably want to have as big of an audience as possible for, your work.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like, all right, with such a niche podcast, it's like, is a sighted person, is an able-bodied person going to be interested in this kind of topic? Mm-hmm. So I'm always kind of tasking myself and thinking like, how can I make this interesting to anyone? Mm-hmm. How can I kind of bridge the gap between the two worlds? Because I myself feel like I'm a part of both worlds,
Sure.
And so I kind of have this different opinion. Like my perspective on things is going to be very different from yours, who you grew up legally blind, and I basically didn't start experiencing symptoms until like my early 20s. And I got to drive a car and, all these things. So it's like, but that affects my perception of my vision loss, where it's like, all right, well, I gave up driving. I moved to New York City so I can use the subway.
Yeah.
Dark places are hard to navigate.
Yeah.
And now I'm having to face that as someone who used to not be a thing at all. And then I also have to wrap my mind around the fact that it's going to get worse.
Yeah.
And what does that mean for my career? Like I make a living as a video editor.
Oh, no kidding. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty visual. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, how long can I do this?
Yeah.
And all this stuff. So, but I think what's really neat about what you're doing with your stand-up is you're bridging that gap, because even when your joke isn't about vision loss, you're teaching the audience that not everything is about vision loss when you are a blind person, and that you have other opinions and you have other interests and you find certain things funny, and they might even, it might make it click for them that your whole world isn't just blindness. You're experiencing planet Earth too. You're hearing the news.
I think it does.
You're going to the grocery store. You're experiencing life the same way everyone else is, but you're experiencing it through, a different, lens, like as you said. And I think maybe it will help click and bridge that gap. And I think that's a great thing. And I think stand-up comedy may be one of the best art forms to do that.
I think you're right. I've just found it to be really a nice way. I mean, one, I couldn't be a niche stand-up comic, like I couldn't only perform for blind people because
Exactly.
I'd never do a show. What am I going to do? Tour like the 8 or 10 remaining blind schools in the country? Like that would be, but yeah, I think that, when I start talking about, how disappointed I am in science or whatever, like, the new iPhone update or whatever it is, like, I'm talking about something that everybody in the room knows and understands. It's like, it creates this, like, that dude's blind, but hopefully within the time that I'm on stage talking to people and making people laugh, they're recognizing like, wow, they have these same experiences in the world that I do. Like there's way more, we're way more in common, have way more in common than we do, than there is that separates us. And I don't think I think people think blindness is like this all consuming condition, that like a blind person, like they're like a fucking alien. And it's because people don't meet blind people, don't spend time with blind people. Most people, I will say, and I've been surprised by this, I've had a few experiences recently where I've worked with not worked with, but like socialized with or done some creative work with much younger folks than I am. Folks in their like, early to mid 20s.
Okay.
And I've been really surprised at how easily they have been about me, a stranger and a blind person, like being part of what they're doing. And so, and I don't spend a lot of time with, a lot of people at my work are younger than I am, but like, I don't spend a lot of time with like young 20 somethings, but there have been a couple of experiences. I went on a camping trip with some folks recently, and then I was doing, I showed up at a kind of an improv gathering, and I was a stranger to almost everybody there. And in both cases, I had a cane, not my dog. And it was actually really nice to see people like, kind of going with the flow and like wanting to be inclusive, asking how to do that, and not making assumptions about like lack of ability. And it was neat. And I don't, like I said, I'm curious how broad that is. Like if there really is a change, a bigger change in the general public, of a certain age, of a younger generation. And if there is, then that's fantastic. I know that I was surprised to like be amongst this group of strangers, this group of people who are much younger than I am, where theoretically we have all of these differences, and they, in a very real way, made me feel comfortable, not by going out of their way to make sure like, oh, are you okay? But by just like engaging and being like, hey, we're going to play this improv game and it works like this. Is there an easy mod we can do so you can play, so that you can play the game? Like there's a visual cue that we use. Can we change the visual cue? Can we do it like this? Can we make it a tactile cue? And it came very naturally. And it wasn't like, I wasn't throwing a fit about accommodations. So that's been pretty cool.
I wonder if that has something to do with social media. There are so many, blind and disabled, influencers out there. And I know a lot of people cringe at the word influencer, and but they are reaching people,
Yeah.
and maybe changing perspectives, and the wider reach, the more that gap's going to get that gap's going to shrink.
I was talking to a sighted person at a bar, and they were telling me about some, I guess, big time YouTube woman who I can't remember her condition, but she's.
Is it Molly Burke, probably?
It is. Yeah. I'd never heard of this person. And they're like, oh, I know about blah, blah, blah from watching so-and-so. And I'm like, what's that? Like,
yeah, exactly. I mean, Molly Burke, and I know in the blindness community, there's mixed feelings about her, but for the most part, she's widely loved, and, she has had a lot of success, and, she's been on, national television, like The Daily Show when Trevor Noah was hosting it.
Oh, no
and,
kidding.
And like, so moments like that are huge. People talk about representation, matters. And, that's a perfect example where it's, shrinking that gap. And I think, maybe the younger generation's also more heavily involved, with like, maybe like the social justice side of things. It bleeds over into
I think so.
That as well, where it's more of like accepting people for who they are.
Yeah.
And maybe that's also part of the mentality. So I the older, maybe it is a generational thing, and maybe it will continue to improve.
Yeah.
That's a very hopeful way to think, I think.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that's the case, because it's been cool. It's been really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess this would be a good chance to kind of segue, because you mentioned, comedy is not your full-time job.
No.
What do you currently do?
So I am a case manager on an assertive community treatment team. And assertive, it's a social work model that was designed to support people with really severe mental illness living in the community. And I mean, kind of the threshold to be on our team is you have to have a psychotic disorder, or what they call a mental illness with psychotic features, which to me kind of sounds like an upgrade to your Honda Accord. It's like, Mr. 50, we'll throw in the psychotic features package. So the idea is supporting people to live and, be a part of the community, to live independently, to be able to receive the kind of services necessary, which range pretty broadly. But we are a very, very much kind of a wraparound program. We have nurses, we have we have nurse practitioners, psychiatric nurse practitioners who can prescribe meds. We have therapists, we have case managers, and people on our team have access to all of these different things in kind of a one-stop shopping experience. And the folks that we support are all over the map as far as where they're at. I mean, we have folks that have been, have lived independently in their own apartment for decades and, managed to, have found medications that work well for them, have found supports that work well for them, and, spend some time on our team getting, stabilized and getting resources in place, and maybe reconnecting with family after they've gone through a really particularly difficult, mental health experience, and then step down from our team. And then we have folks that, are currently homeless, dealing with really severe ongoing mental health symptoms, various kinds of hallucinations and delusions and really severe paranoia, active substance use. So those are kind of the two extremes. And we try and support those people, and, help them become, get them into housing, help support them in housing, and just, help them find a way to where they want to be. And so that's my day job. That's my day job.
That's awesome. Sounds very commendable and sounds fulfilling. It sounds like you would get a lot out of your work. Mental health is something that I like to cover on the See Through podcast.
Yeah.
And you work in that field, and
I happen to be, I don't mean to cut you off, but I'll
No.
maybe just, I happen to have a serious mental illness. It wouldn't get me on this team as a client, but I suffered from what had been diagnosed as chronic depression basically since I was 16. And it got more and more severe as I got older. And I tried all kinds of medication, all kinds of therapy. And when I was 38, I saw, and I was, to use a poor choice of words, maybe I was kind of at the end of my rope. I really felt like I had just tried everything and nothing was working. And I was pretty desperate. Like I was really starting to not be very functional. And I got in to see a psychiatrist, and he said, he talked to me for 20 minutes or so. And he said, I think you have bipolar. And I'm like, I don't have bipolar. I don't have mania. And he said, well, I think you have bipolar 2, and bipolar 2 doesn't have mania. And he said, do you kind of feel like you swing from really super depressed to just a little bit depressed? And that happens pretty regularly. And I was like, yeah, that sounds real familiar. And he said, I want you to try this medication. And I said, okay. And, I was super, super lucky. I found the right psychiatrist and the right med, and it was life-changing. And I mean, probably, I think very genuinely life-saving at that point. It took me, 16 to 38. Took me that long to get there. But
and how old are you now?
47. I turned 47 on Halloween. So.
Oh, Halloween birthday, huh?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thanks for sharing that. In terms of the depression, do you think that had anything to do with vision loss? Or do you think it's outside of that?
I think that the bipolar and the vision loss are two separate things. I think that it was hard for people, like when you're a blind kid, when you're a disabled kid, a blind kid, whatever, like anything you do that's weird, people put it off to the fact that you're blind. It's like, oh, well, of course he's having a hard time adjusting. He's blind. Like, oh, of course he, everything was about being blind. And don't get me wrong, like being blind is hard. Like it is mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually difficult. It just, I will argue that with anyone. I don't know anyone who, I would, yeah. Anyway, so the depression really was sort of a separate thing. I think I would have experienced, a degree of depression and grief and a sense of loss had I not had bipolar. But I think in this case, the mental illness was a separate and standalone thing. And honestly was much more debilitating than the blindness was.
Interesting.
Because, and I'll give you an example. When I think I told you earlier, when we were talking earlier, I started college like 7 times, and I was profoundly unsuccessful each of those times. Starting at like 18, right out of high school, I did the thing you were supposed to do. Boom, September, went to school, lasted until Thanksgiving break, came home. Did that, like I said, I think 7 times. I got to, and that was with, pretty solid, useful vision, still at being a high partial. 38, I got on this medication. That year, I had 2 people super close to me die. I went through a divorce. The next year, I started college, finished college in 4 years. I was student of the year. I was scholar. I was blah, 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 But
Yeah.
I had way less vision than I had. I needed way more in the way of accommodations, needed to, do things much differently. So that's why I say, like, the mental health piece was much more a factor in me sort of taking a longer time, if you will, to get where I wanted to be and knew that I could be, to really get headed down that path than the blindness was. But it never looks that way. People assume, it's because you're blind. Oh, well, of course, this is challenging. Of course, you're tired and depressed. Of course, like, they, but in my case, I have no doubt, like, I'm not saying I would have been all that if I hadn't had the bipolar too, but the bipolar was much more debilitating to me and really held me back much more than the blindness has.
That's very interesting because I think, again, I mean, I kind of fell for it when you told me about being depressed. I was like, maybe it was something to do with the blindness. So I even went there. Yeah. So it's like, I've heard past guests talk about this, and it's something that I'm interested in. It's like people talk about physically adapting to a disability. There's that side, learning to use a cane, all the tools that come with that.
Right.
And then there's the mental side of adapting.
Yeah.
And I always like to talk about the mental side of adapting. It seems like if you have your mind right, if you can get your mind right, which is very hard to do, but yeah,
True.
But if you can get your mind right, the rest kind of comes a lot easier, and you're going to be able to experience and learn and kind of soak up the information you need to do to physically adapt.
Yeah.
But without like the mental adaptation, it's really everything else is kind of suffer from that.
Yeah, 100%.
And it sounds like in your scenario, you like you said with the bipolar, when you failed college and then you got linked up with the psychiatrist, worked on that medication. Then you graduate, you're student of the year, and now you've worked all these different jobs. You're still like my impression of you is you seem to be a very, put together, kind of joyful, but maybe slightly cynical person.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but you seem like you have a desire to experience the world and to live, and you want the best for yourself. And I think that's inspiring for me and for hopefully people listening, because it's like you were in a dark place and you were able to work on yourself.
Yeah.
And then your road got clearer and clearer, and life is shit, and life's going to throw you obstacles. And I'm sure you've had setbacks here and there and ups and downs,
100%.
But it's really about the drive to live, which without the drive to live and the drive to experience and the drive to be the best version of yourself, if you don't have that, then everything else in your life is going to suffer.
And I'll tell you, and I mean, this is not this is probably not what your therapist will tell you, but it was a thing that was real for me for a long time. I was, and you can put in whatever trigger warnings or whatever you need to at the beginning of the episode, but like I was profoundly suicidal for a long time. Like suicide was a thing that was on my mind a lot for a lot of years.
Yeah.
And one of the conversations I had with myself over and over again was don't be a wimp. Like, you live in a house, you have enough food to eat, you have people that care about you. Like, what, like, suck it up. Like, you can always kill yourself tomorrow if it's really that bad, but how bad is it? Like, think about the world, think about places you've been, think about, the suffering that people experience and go through. And that was a thing for me. Like, I didn't want to give up. And I felt like I didn't have the right to give up because I had this stuff that even if I couldn't find joy in it because of the level of depression I was experiencing, even if I, couldn't believe, like, look 5 years down the road and see myself somewhere, it was like, compared to a lot of people, I got it pretty good. And I needed to remind myself of that and just keep going and just keep trying. Like, does somebody know someone? And holy shit, somebody knew a psychiatrist. And he's like, yeah, this guy's really good. He helped me out. You should check him out. Like, kept going to therapists, kept trying things. And all that said, now, as someone who's medicated, where the bipolar is not a major factor in my life at all, experiencing the vision loss that I'm experiencing, going from very limited useful vision to even more limited, but still fairly consistent vision, useful vision, to the point where I'm at now, where there's almost none left. Every once in a while, there'll be a glimpse of something where it's like, holy shit, the light's just right. And I can see the white crosswalk paint on the fresh black pavement. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But that used to be like almost a given. Like, even as my vision got worse and worse, like, I could still see that. I could still see that contrast. Now that's not even a given. Sometimes it happens, but it's like, it's not something I can rely on. And it's been a hard adjustment. And that really surprised me, like, because, you talked about the physical parts, and I was like, oh, I've done the cane training. I've got the dog. I can pour my coffee without looking, like, yada, yada, yada. But I wasn't prepared. Here's the thing that really got me: when I realized I no longer had color vision. I've been able to see color all my life until about a year ago. And, the changes in vision are so subtle, for me anyway, have been so subtle. It was like, you don't know you can't see something until you're in like a really specific situation. I don't know that I've got the best words to describe it, but with color vision, like, I took myself outside where the light was good, where, 2 months before that, I would have absolutely been able to tell you that I was wearing a blue t-shirt. Yeah. And I would have been 100% confident I would have been right. And I walked outside and my fucking t-shirt was red. And it was like, oh, like, it's gone. Like, I can't do this anymore. I really can't see color. And what's weirder is my world does not look black and white when I'm like scanning my head around and seeing shapes and shadows and lights and things. Like, my brain is filling in color. If I pick up a shirt that I've owned for 3 years, my brain knows what color it is. And like, it looks that way in my brain.
Yeah.
Right. But if you handed me a shirt that felt the same cut, same material, all that, and it was black and the other one was white, My brain, you know, the one I owned was white. My brain would make it white.
So you almost like old memories of vision is kind of,
Yeah.
while nice, while it's amazing that you have all these memories and mental images you can kind of pull from, it almost is working against you as your eyes adapt to where you're at now, and it's making you second guess what you're seeing.
Yes. Yeah. My brain is trying so hard to fill in these pieces, but the pieces are based on what I saw 2 years ago. I've been living in the same apartment for 3 years, and all of this real significant change in vision has happened over the past year. And so I had a couple of years of, you know, to a greater or lesser extent, seeing my living room, right? Seeing the color of the chair, the color of the couch, my shelves, my, you know, stuff around the living room. Well, because my living room hasn't changed, I can walk around my living room in the pitch black, and my brain is projecting my living room as if the lights were on and I were seeing it.
It's even hard for me to even think about.
It's really, really weird, man. And it's really distracting. Like it doesn't feel helpful at this point. Because if you came into my living room and put something different here, moved something, painted my kind of light tannish couch like neon orange, I'd never know. Like, you know, I would still see it the way it looked the last best time I saw it visually. Does that?
Yeah. So it's like kind of imprinted.
Yeah.
It's like a permanent imprint.
Yeah. And I wonder, you know, it's really struck me with faces. Because faces, I could, you know, I'd be in like the right light with someone, generally someone I was very close to, like emotionally, like close to as a person, in order that I would be sitting very close to them or looking at them very closely, and the light would be just right, and I would like see their face as clearly as I could ever see it. And now I don't remember faces at all. Like they're too detailed. Like I've been dating my partner for the last 3 years. And I can remember having the experience of being with her 2 years ago, or, you know, even a year and a half ago, and we're sitting outside and the light is just right and it's optimal and we're sitting close together, and I'm like thinking like, wow, this is the clearest I've ever seen this person's face. But that detail is gone. Like I can't bring somebody's face into focus in my brain. And that's, you know, again, that's been weird. Because, you know, you talked about like living in both worlds. Like you're a sighted person now who is experiencing some symptoms of vision loss.
Yeah.
With the expectation of experiencing much more dramatic vision loss symptoms.
Yeah.
So as someone who was a high partial, I was, you know, I never lost the ability to drive, right? I never had that loss. Like that was never going to be a thing for me, but I was still functioning visually. And if I was around blind people, if I went to, you know, a blind conference or something like that, I had more vision than the vast majority of the people there. So I, you know, kind of felt that same thing too, of like, people aren't interacting with me like a blind person. I'm not interacting like a blind person, yet I'm, struggling with these things, like you said, like, you don't use a cane, but you get into a dark restaurant. No shit. Where's the chair? I was having those experiences as someone with 2200 vision. I was walking around, but then like, I'd ask the bus driver what number the bus was, and he'd be like, "What's the matter with you? Can't you read?" Or like going into a fast food place and like needing help, not being able to see the menu behind the counter. But they didn't know. Like, I wasn't giving them any help.
Yeah.
They didn't have any clue. So I don't know. I think I got off on a tangent there, but I do feel the sense of kind of having lived in, and now I'm really beginning to live in the other world. And, I've even like, I lost a lot of vision and then I got some back due to science, like I had an artificial cornea put in and it restored some vision. Because I thought in my late 20s and early 30s, like that was it. Like I had kind of gotten to a place where it was lights and shadows and I was really functioning, in a non-visual way. And then, had a surgery that restored some vision. It was like, holy shit, I didn't think this was ever I didn't think I'd ever go back. I didn't think I'd ever get more.
Yeah.
And now, I'm here and man, I am way too vain to feel good about losing color vision. Still trying to figure out how to pick the clothes, and it's Maine, so I got like 7 flannel shirts. They're all different colors, but they all fucking feel the same.
Yeah.
So trying to figure out those systems and just have to like acknowledge like, yep, it's time. Like I got to do this. I got to put this stuff in place and it still doesn't feel real because my brain is trying so hard and I pick up that old shirt and it's blue, but I pick up that new shirt that I bought 6 weeks ago. I don't know what color it is.
Yeah. But you're seeing it as blue.
No, the old shirt I'm seeing is blue. The new shirt, my brain doesn't have anything to work with. It's just going,
I see.
I don't know. The one I bought a year ago, and when I bought it, I could see it. And, the one I bought 6 weeks ago,
I see it. So it only works with things. I thought it was like taking past memories and then projecting them onto new things. And kind of filling in the gap there. When you said remembering faces, are you saying that you're having a hard time like picturing faces inside your memory?
Yeah. And I mean,
is that a thing? Like, because that's something like I guess I've never really thought about. Is trying to remember details of people, like, because I can think back and it's like I can remember faces from people I went to high school with, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something, are we talking about a different thing or is it just something that you're experiencing personally?
I think like faces were always like this special treat for me because in general, I didn't have enough vision or enough close interaction to be able to see somebody's face, in normal life, in normal walking around. Like when I had more vision, I would usually like, I could see somebody's hair color. I would often like identify people because I could recognize what they were wearing. So if I knew like, oh, I'm in a meeting today with so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so, Sheila's wearing a white top and dark slacks and has, brown hair. And I could see those sort of big chunks in that contrast. With faces, it would just be that every once in a while I'd be in a setting that was just right.
Yeah.
Where I knew like, wow, I'm like seeing this person's whole face at once. And, obviously it's not the detail that you see, but it was the most detail that I was going to see. And, but those just haven't stuck. Like I can't.
So the difference is like, I have more data to kind of base off my memories around.
Right.
And you were working with less data.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see.
You know,
so the details matter in terms of pulling memories and picturing them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you've seen tens of thousands, if not more faces, right? You know, so you have this whole catalog, and like, if you close your eyes and imagine your wife's face, you're married, right? Didn't you say your wife just came up?
Yeah.
Okay. I would bet you that if you live to be 80 and are totally blind, you will still be able to remember your wife's face in detail.
Because I had the data.
Because of the length of time and the data, and you're like, you just have this like innate understanding of what makes up a face. And I have these like, just like pops of faces throughout my life with, you know, a limited number of people and a limited number of times when it was like, the distance, the light, like all the things were right. And I was like, wow.
But, you know, visuals, would you say visuals, it can't be everything, right? Like you have to be able to, like, memories of things you probably tie into other senses and whatnot, I would imagine.
Yeah. What did the air feel like? Like, what did it smell like? Like all of those things.
Yeah. I think to sum all this up, the theme is just vision loss journey. And even someone born legally blind still has a vision loss journey. You know, or you go from fully sighted to legally blind, you know, that's a vision loss journey. There's all different forms of vision loss journeys. And yours has been kind of a prolific one, you know, where you even mentioned, it's like you lost a lot of vision, thought that was, you know, the end of that. And then you regained some from surgery. And now you're back, you're losing it again. And then you still got a lot of life left to live, and it's going to still change, you know? And that's one thing that I kind of practice is like and preach about is the only thing that isn't going to change is change.
When we recognize how little we actually have control over in the world, like even in our lives, that becomes incredibly freeing. Because if you spend all your time trying to control everything, like you can't do it, you know? I mean, so pick the stuff that really, really matters to you, that you actually have a chance of affecting, and just, you know, understand that change is going to happen whether you want it to or not. And, you know, how it happens and how we feel about it, that's the only part that's really up to us. Like, do we, you know, ride it out? Do we make the best of it? Do we turn it into something cool? Do we, you know, just do our best to survive it and get on to the next thing? Like,
humans are pretty resilient, or I won't say all, but humans can be very resilient. And, there's a strong desire to live, and even in your darkest days, you still had something in you, you know, that wanted you to keep trying, you know, and I think it's hard to do sometimes, but you got to try to keep that little bit of, even if you feel like you're at the end, it seems like that little bit of drive can take you so far, and it can snowball.
Well, and I'll tell you, I mean, I think about some of the folks that I work with who they aren't living inside. They don't have food every day.
Yeah.
And they still keep going, you know, like they're getting up every day, like, and they, you know, every day is harder than probably, and I won't speak for you, but like in a lot of ways, any day you or I have ever had.
Oh yeah. I don't doubt it.
You know, every day, and they keep going. And it's amazing. And I think, like, you know, it just kind of reinforces this idea of like, man, if I had like if I'd given up when shit was bad for me, man, I would have been a total wuss, you know? So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And that's definitely insightful because, a lot of people are experiencing hard times, and sometimes it's easy to think that it's never going to improve and that it's only going to get worse, but there's ebbs and flows, and, and it's like, yeah, I just find it, your journey with vision loss, and also, with dealing with being bipolar, and then working a wide variety of jobs that we didn't really honestly get into, but you mentioned guns,
Yeah.
What
It was super fun.
yeah. And then, and now you're working, in that fulfilling job you have now, helping people. And then you just for, shits and giggles, you do stand-up comedy. Like you said, you've done theater, and you've just tried and do a lot. And I think, like we mentioned before, a lot of people don't try because a lot of, people listen to those people who said you're going to work in the pen factory, and,
Right.
And I just admire your spirit in terms of pushing yourself, even when sometimes your physical brain is telling you not to. And
it's hard,
yeah.
man. I mean, I know that there are people out there and they like are rah, like, my disability's great. Like, I've had blind people tell me like, I would rather be blind.
Yeah.
I that is not me.
Yeah.
Like, you give me the option, I am not checking the blind box.
Same.
And if that works for them, then okay. But, when it comes to being able to experience things, I always want to be able to experience more. So, yeah, I fucking miss not being able to see color. And, like, I miss not being able to, like, check somebody out, like, walking down the street.
Mm-hmm.
And miss being able to, whatever, look at pictures or just feel like walking around is a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But it isn't anymore. But you got to do other stuff. You still got to walk around, and, you still got to, you just got to find other ways to interact with people and fill your life. And they're not going to be, for me, they're not going to be, you got to find a way to label your clothes, and none of that is rocket science, but you gotta kind of get after it. I think there's one more thing I kind of on this topic that I want to share. And I know I ramble a lot, but, I think that for people with disabilities, and even more so for people without disabilities, there are two extremes. And like there are two types of disabled people. There are disabled people that like never go anywhere and never do anything and have been convinced that the best and safest place for them is like at home. But then there's this other idea that everybody else with a disability, like who isn't doing that, is like a fucking superhero, like has to be a superhero. And I think that it's a disservice, right? Like they're amazing people, and they're average people, and they're below average people. And that's true for everybody. Like I got to go to Africa with Eric Weinmeier, and I probably everybody listening to this podcast knows that he's the blind guy who climbed Everest and solo kayaked the Grand Canyon. He is a badass dude.
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
It's a really great, opportunity to spend some time with that guy and do some cool outdoor shit with him. You had a guy, the first episode of your podcast I listened to, I'm not going to remember the guy's name, but he was doing like multi-gazillion-dollar contracts for the government.
Oh yeah,
like
Chad
writing
Foster.
Chad Foster. Yeah. Like writing his own code. And, man, I hate computers. I can't write code. Like, I can't even spell gazillion. Although I did relate to that dude because I used to be the scary looking bald guy with a big German shepherd. Like I related to him. I related to him on the jujitsu level. And I think it's important, like, to have people who are like inspiring, who have done these amazing things. But I think it's really important to have people who are regular people.
Yeah.
Like who do, the things that they love to do and want to do. Like I am not going to climb Everest. And I am, not that I wouldn't if somebody gave me the opportunity, but let's be real, that probably ain't going to happen. Like I'm a social worker. Well, technically I'm a case manager. I do social work.
Yeah.
Like I am not going to get rich doing this job. I did not go to Harvard and that's unlikely to happen. And you know what? That's like most of the world, is people doing that stuff. And it's okay. Like, you don't have to be Helen Keller or Eric Wanmeyer or Chad Foster or Stevie Wonder. Like, you just live the life that you want to live and find people that hopefully help you believe that you can do that. And it doesn't have to, you don't have to prove to sighted people that you're accomplished because you did a thing that they couldn't do or they didn't do.
Yeah. I think that's perfectly said. And I think that's a great sentiment to share and to push and to remind people, it's that statistic going back to it, 78% unemployed or, underemployed.
Yeah.
Just by having a career that you enjoy, you're winning, and it sounds simple, but that is the case, and I think that's a win for anyone.
And it's a win that we can all get to.
Yeah, exactly.
Like we are not all gonna, like the percentage of the blind community that's climbed Everest is 0.0000 Eric.
Yeah.
And that's probably going to be that's probably going to be the case for a long time, but that's true with the sighted community as well. That's true with sighted people as well. So, we don't have to be superheroes. We shouldn't try and be superheroes, and we shouldn't let sighted people pretend that because I'm a blind guy working with folks with psychotic disorders that I'm some kind of a superhero. I'm not. I'm a fucking case manager with a bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
And, this is the work I do. And some days I love it and some days I hate it. And you know what? I bet that's like a whole lot of other people out there who have jobs.
Oh, 1,000%.
And it's hard, man. I mean, I think really the last thing, like two folks out there who have vision loss, who are experiencing vision loss, the game is rigged. Like the world is not built for us to be successful in. Like we have to be successful by putting in more work, and more work is as simple as the extra energy it takes for me and my dog to walk to work every day and deal with construction and snowbanks and shitty drivers and electric cars that don't make any noise. Like that's, that isn't something that a sighted person has to deal with. Getting to the end of a web page and having a button that isn't clickable with a keyboard isn't something a sighted person has to deal with. And we do. And it's hard, and it's okay that it is hard. And, let's keep working to make it more accessible and make it more inclusive, but let's not pretend that we're there.
Yeah.
Or that the ADA fixed everything, or that we have the answer to all those problems. Like the fact that I'm blind and the fact that I use a computer does not mean I know how to fix the computer problems.
Exactly. Yeah. So basically, to call a spade, it's better, it's improving, but the reality at the end of the day, you're facing disadvantages, you know?
I'm spending more energy trying to do the same things that a sighted person is doing than they are.
And that's just a fact, you know, and that
just so, you know, don't give up. Don't be a wuss, but, you know, go easy on yourself. Like, get that rest. Like, take those days. You don't have to be a superhero. You know, but do the things you want to do, even if you're scared of them. Go out and try them out.
Keep going. Don't have to be a superhero. And, you know, you don't have to be the person who climbs Mount Everest. And you shouldn't feel bad about not climbing Mount Everest, because even able-bodied people are barely climbing Mount Everest.
Right.
You know?
And you don't have to be the guy that, you know, makes the computer system accessible just because you need the computer system to be accessible.
Yeah.
You know, that's, you know, if you're not a computer accessibility person, then, you know, that's not your job. And don't let people tell you it is.
1,000%. Well, Sam, we could probably, and I'm not exaggerating, could go for 4 more hours, I bet. And I think this might be my longest episode that I've ever done.
Oh, shit. Well, once you hear how much I rambled, you cut it down and edit it.
Oh, no, but you said a lot. Everything was gold. Everything was golden.
Oh, man.
I like everything you said.
I'm glad you brought me on, man. I'm so excited to do this with you. And I think what you're doing is awesome for yourself and, you know, and for the community of people out there that are interested or are going to go through this.
Well, yeah, I just am genuinely interested and curious about people's stories and vision loss journeys. And I have, like I said, I'm a video editor and I have the skill set to do it. So I'm just using my skill set and doing something that I enjoy doing.
I love that.
So again,
well, maybe you'll give me a discount if I send you some of my YouTube pocket knife reviews and you can do some video editing for me, because that's way outside my skill set.
Oh, yeah. I'll have to look your YouTube. I'll have to subscribe to your channel.
It's not, it doesn't exist yet.
When it exists.
Yeah, right.
Anyway. And for everyone listening or watching, you know, if you want to contact or get in touch with Sam, I'll have some links in the episode description where you can reach him.
Yep, absolutely.
And is there anything else you want to advertise? Anything else? Where can people reach you or whatnot?
No, I'm kind of a Luddite. I've been kind of struggling with social media, really trying to get kind of into that, particularly because of the comedy. But right now I'm like that old dude on Facebook. So you can find me there. Sam Atwood, like hit me up on Messenger. Actually, Lance, if you want to share my email and links, that's fine too. That's an easy way to get a hold of me, and you don't have to you know, try and figure out which Sam Atwood I am, and I don't have to try and figure out who the hell you are. So
yeah. So I'll have links to Sam's Facebook and email address if you want to find him there. But I think that does it, man. We could have kept talking on and on, but you know, I think maybe another time we'll have I'm sure me and you will continue this conversation outside of the podcast, or maybe you'll come back on another time. But anyways,
look forward to it.
What you said was gold, and I appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your 47 years of experience dealing with vision loss and all that comes with it. And I really appreciate you opening up and spending the time to talk with me. So thanks again.
Hey, man, I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, man, take care.